democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Our guest is Ron Suskind, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. His book is Confidence Men, Wall Street, Washington, and the Education of a President. Juan?
Well, Ron, I was struck in reading the book that you talk obviously not only about the presidency itself, but that year of the campaign and how Obama began to develop his confidence in different folks, especially in the financial world. I was struck by the degree of reliance that he had on the advice of so many folks on Wall Street. And one of the people that features prominently in the book is Robert Wolf, the head of UBS Americas, who most Americans really didn't know anything about until he became the first golf partner in the first vacation that Obama took on Martha's Vineyard. Talk about Bob Wolf's role, his importance to Obama before he got elected and then in the presidency.
Yeah, Robert Wolf was sort of the key man for fundraising for the president in New York, primarily on Wall Street in early 2008 through 2008. Starting in 2007, and they, became close as friends. But what's interesting is that at one point in the book, at the beginning of the book, in early August of 2007, when the economy is shuddering, but people are not yet clear, for the most part, even in the financial industry largely, what's happening, and certainly not in the political community, Wolf gets a glimpse of the future. He's on a yacht in Long Island Sound, a 110-foot yacht owned by a friend of his, used to work for him, who's a hedge fund manager. And this hedge fund manager is also very early to feel the credit crisis hit. His fund is melting down while they're on the boat. He is, of course, very agitated, yelling into his phone. Wolf, at that point just a contributor to the president and very affectionate toward the president, says, I need to tell this to Barack. He goes up to the flying deck of the boat, called the Dream in French, and calls Barack Obama and says, Barack, it was Obama's birthday, his 46th birthday, and says, he said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. This is a market-driven disaster coming that will melt the U.S. economy and maybe the global economy. Obama is startled. He had just received economic briefings, which I have in the book as well, showing the underlying fragility of the U.S. economy, so much of it burdened by leverage and hollowed out at its core, especially because of men in such a difficult shape in the middle and lower working classes. Wages have been flat for 30 years. And Obama gets a glimpse of the future, a hard glimpse. At that moment, and Obama discusses this some in the interview, he begins to move very forcefully, seeing that Wall Street needs to be reformed. He's ahead of everyone on this. He's ahead of not only people on Wall Street, but even some in the progressive community. This is what needs to happen. We need to essentially bring probity to this financial industry. All the way through into the fall, the community that gathers around Obama is an ecumenical, bipartisan community. Paul Volcker, Bill Donaldson, the SEC chairman under George Bush, Robert Reich, Laura Tyson, Robert Wolf, an executive from Wall Street ready to do virtually anything for the president and speak real candor. This group is important to Obama because it is, in many people's minds, the kind of group you want at a crisis. Nothing in terms of a dog in the fight for any of them, and speaking clearly to Obama. This group, all the way to the fall, is primary and central, at which point, however, they are replaced, for the most part, washed away, certainly by the time the administration starts, by a different group, which are mostly those who are tied in some ways to Robert Rubin and the Clinton administration. In fact, something I found in the book, which is one of its many disclosures, is that Robert Rubin, the Citigroup chairman and once Treasury Secretary, was offered a $1 a year job to have an office in the White House, actually in the administration. He ended up not taking that because Citigroup collapsed and Rubin essentially became toxic. But the primacy, the centrality of the Rubin group, Larry Summers and Tim Geithner end up in the two key positions of the presidency as economic advisors. Larry Summers, economic advisor, Tim Geithner, Treasury Secretary. And in some ways, the die are cast, at least significantly at that point. I think that's clear looking back.
Ron Suskind's book has elicited harsh reaction from the White House since it was published. Current White House Communications Director Dan Pfeiffer said his book is full of, quote, drama, palace intrigue, and salacious details based on anonymous accounts. Meanwhile, top economic advisor Larry Summers said the hearsay attributed to me is a combination of fiction, distortion, and words taken out of context. I can't speak to what others have told Mr. Suskind, but I've always believed that the president has led the country with determined, steady, and practical leadership in the economic area. And former White House Communications Director Anita Dunn has flat-out denied Ron Suskind's claim that she said the White House is a hostile workplace to women. Speaking to the Washington Post Friday, Dunn said she'd point-blank told Suskind that the White House was not a hostile environment. Ron Suskind, your response, and talk about why you're saying that.
Yeah, well, Anita Dunn, of course, talked to me extensively about especially the gender issues in both the campaign and in the White House. Her quotes are in the book. Again, the women's issue is not central, I don't think, to the flow of the book. It's important.
It may not be central to you, but to many it is.
To many people, it is white-hot stuff. Anita discussed, especially when she arrives at the White House, what she found in terms of real tension between men and women. What we did here, and let me just sort of describe, you know, the general issues we'll talk about in a minute, but let me first deal with the Anita Dunn issue, is that she said initially discussing this that she discussed with Valerie Jarrett in the White House. She said, you know, if it were not for the president, we would be in court for a hostile workplace because the place actually fit the legal definition of a hostile workplace toward women. With Anita Dunn, as with all or most of the other key subjects, I went back. If they have a quote like that that's going to be defining and attached to their name, I call them back and I say, look, you should know what's going in the book next to your name. I did that with Anita Dunn. We discussed the quote. She pushed back at the end saying, look, my husband was general counsel, this is right before publication, during this time. If I identified a legal issue on this in this area in the White House in present tense, I would have to have told my husband. It will cause a difficulty for me and my husband. I said, well, what are you suggesting? And she says, well, I'm talking to you in the spring of this year, and it is a recollection. Looking back is where I stand when I say it. So she said she would think it would be more appropriate and accurate in her mind to say, looking back, I felt it fit the legal definition of a hostile workplace for women. I said, all right. I said, well, what about this thing about if not for the president? It didn't actually make much sense in the original quote. I meant to talk to her about that, meaning if it was a different president but the same hostile workplace, it would somehow be different legally. That doesn't seem to make sense. She said, no, you're right, that is confusing. What I meant was that we all had great affection for the president. We would have walked across hot coals for the man. And I said, fine. So the way this quote will appear in the book is that will be a paragraph prior to the quote, because it's actually not really related to your thoughts about the hostile workplace. And the hostile workplace quote will be from your lips, looking back, this place fit the legal definition of a hostile workplace. That's our discussion prior to publication, so she knew exactly what was going in the book on that issue, on that quote. When the book came out, you know, understandably, there is a moment where people are stunned, and I've been through this many times. Many reporters have, journalists. They talk to you. They spend a lot of time with you. I go back to make sure they'll know exactly what's going in the book. But, you know, we live in difficult partisan times, and when the lights come up and they're blinding, all sorts of things happen in terms of what's often called the Washington walk back or non-denial denials. I think we would put Larry Summers' denial in that category. I would also say, I think quite pointedly, that Larry, just like Anita, was told about the Home Alone quote in its full 3 parts, Home Alone, there's no adult in charge, Clinton wouldn't make these mistakes prior to publication. His response is in the book in a rather full paragraph that responds directly to the quote, rather than just sort of says, you know, I don't know.
And Ron Suskind, the title,
yes,
Confidence Men. Why did you settle on that, and its importance in terms of the themes you bring out in the book?
Well, can I just finish up on with the women? I'll get to that in 1 second. Is that I think it's very important to note that the White House pushed me toward Anita Dunn to give voice to the women's issues, because their view, and I think it is largely true and reflected as such in the book, is that the president did engage on this and certainly ameliorated those issues inside of the White House. That was the reason the White House said Anita Dunn is a person you should talk to who can give it shape and voice. The president met with the women in November in the residence. They aired their grievances. The president was sympathetic and attentive. And many of the women, though not much action emerged from that meeting, felt that the president's empathy was sufficient to ease the situation. The women's group then met later amongst themselves for support. And so I think it's important that people see the evolution of that issue, because the point of this book in significant and central ways is the evolution of the person we care most about, the president, the central actor of this period. Which brings me to the title, Confidence Men. The book never calls anyone a con man. It's a play on the word confidence, because throughout American history, confidence has really been the coin of the realm. All through our difficult moments and our comebacks in America from difficult times, it is often about a leader instilling confidence in the people of the country. Certainly Roosevelt does this to establish his legacy during the Depression. Kennedy, in his way, brings a kind of confidence upon his arrival. Reagan, as I point out in the book, was a master at projecting confidence. And that's why this issue of confidence is central, and central to the interview with the president. He speaks eloquently about how he sees confidence being more aptly used now that he has learned what he's learned.
Ron Suskind, I want to thank you for being with us. We're going to go to part 2 of this interview in our post show, and we'll put it up as a web exclusive at democracynow.org. Ron Suskind is Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, author of his latest book, Confidence Men, Wall Street, Washington, and the Education of a President. This is Democracy Now!